Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. What does he want for his country? Is he a reformer? And what are his critics saying? Hello, I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. Just 32 years old, Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, is already one of the most powerful figures in the Middle East. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is described as a leader in waiting. He is expected to take over as king when his aging father, King Salman, departs the throne. And he could rule for decades. Mohammed bin Salman says he wants to reform his country. Already this year, he has lifted the ban on women driving. He also wants to diversify Saudi Arabia's economy to make it less dependent on oil. And 2 years ago, he launched a plan called Vision 2030. Plus, he serves as the country's defense minister and has led a Saudi coalition to a controversial war in Yemen that has resulted in over 10,000 deaths, many of them civilians. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince made news headlines recently after a diplomatic spat with Canada. So, for more now on who he is and what he wants, joining me from Jeddah is Faisal Al-Shammeri. He is a political analyst and columnist for Al-Arabiya. With me here in the studio is Ali Al-Ahmed. He is the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs. Also with us is Negar Mortazavi. She is the Washington correspondent for Iran International. And joining us too is Karen Young. She is senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, all of you, for joining us. Faisal, let's start with you in Jeddah. Obviously, a big change from the past, in Saudi Arabia. What's the view inside the kingdom for this sort of breathtaking pace of reform and change?
Thank you for having me, first of all. Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, becoming the youth champion. The Saudi youth is looking up to him. The reforms that's happening in the kingdom, the fast pace that is happening in the kingdom, it's supported with from a wide range of young men and women. He lifted the ban on women driving. This year alone, the woman participation in the workforce increased by 5%. So we're on target to reach 30% of the workforce by 2020, female in the workforce. I just wanted to emphasize one crucial component, that at the end of the day, the decision maker of the kingdom is the king himself, King Salman, His Majesty King Salman. Whatever Prince Mohammed bin Salman did, and all these reforms happened by the backing of the king. Also, there is huge opportunity for Saudi youth to reach high positions. Currently, there is a huge transformation in the country.
Well, thanks for Ali. Let's pick up on a couple of things mentioned there. It was mentioned that there's so many young people in Saudi Arabia. 70% of the kingdom is under 30. There are also dislocations in the oil market, its biggest export. Is this what's behind the reforms and the new policies?
I think I'll take exception to the word reforms, because in the Western media, every Saudi king is a reformer. From King Saud until now. In 1960s, Helen Norton put an ad in the New York Times saying Saudi Arabia is going through massive transformation, social and political. We have heard this old movie.
So you think it's more PR?
Absolutely, because when you talk about reforms, you're doing two things. You're giving legitimacy to the existing regime, and you are actually saying that they are good and have good intentions. Allowing women to drive is nothing major, really. It's like allowing slaves to drive. See, because women's status in the country remains very, secondary. They are still part of a man. They are not individually, legally independent from a man. So they cannot leave the country. They cannot get a passport. They cannot be on their own. And that is, I think, this is reform. It's a good thing to lift the driving ban on women, but economic pressures made it happen, and maybe some U.S. demands for it. Not, it's not genuine reform. A genuine reformer actually connects to the people, and those women who advocated for women driving are behind bars. Those who advocated against it are in the government.
I want to get back to that in a minute, but is it fair, Karen, to say that this is all PR? I mean, there's Vision 2030, for example, laid out. There's a lot of specifics there. They want to create a sovereign wealth fund of $2 billion, $500 billion economic zone reaching into Jordan, Egypt. And there was, of course, the centerpiece of this was the partial flotation of the state oil company, Aramco. That's just been pulled back. But there seems to be a lot of detail here behind this reforms. Is that true?
Well, the numbers that you mentioned are actually even much bigger. It's a $500 billion project in Neom at the Red Sea. So, in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Public Investment Fund is also much larger in assets, about $250 billion in assets. So, are the reforms real? Yes, they're real. Does this mean this is democratization? Certainly not. So, I think you're correct, Ali, when you say that there have been announcements of efforts to try to open up the kingdom in the past. But this is different in that the religious police have truly been curtailed. We are seeing some progress on women's participation economically and even politically with the municipal council elections in December two years ago. No, but let me finish.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I'm not saying that it's, everything is wonderful and everyone is happy, but I do believe this time is different. So mostly because the reforms under the leadership of the Crown Prince, because he looks like the demographics of the country. And this is important. So the youth bulge and the symbol of youthful leadership is a real departure from what we've seen traditionally in Saudi Arabia. In terms of the Aramco IPO, are we off track in terms of Vision 2030? Not necessarily. I think many analysts had expected that this IPO had stalled, would not move forward at the expectation.
Why is that? Because, biggest oil company in the world, if you let it float, $50 to $100 billion. Why did it stop?
Who knows exactly, but probably there were problems at getting to the valuation that the Crown Prince had wanted and when he announced. I think there were also differed expectations and wishes between those who manage the company, which is a well-run firm, which is wholly state-owned, and the political aspirations for Aramco. And I think probably the government is seeing now that Aramco is more valuable as a state-owned asset than as one that is shared with foreign investors. There's a lot of focus right now on spending, on government spending inside of Saudi Arabia. So in terms of economic diversification and allowing the private sector to grow, attracting foreign investment, these things aren't really happening that fast. Really what's happening now is the same thing that has driven the economy in Saudi Arabia for decades, which is the state as the primary actor. And the government continues to have large outlays on these infrastructure projects, on projects like Neom, and that is a priority even now.
Negar, there also seems to be reform when it comes to the clerics as well. A lot of students of the region have seen Saudi Arabia's reaction since 1979 to the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Also, Saudi Arabia has been accused as an exporter of terrorism. Is some of these reforms seen regionally as combating those two things?
Well, I think the reforms, we can call them reforms and we should call them reforms. He's a young prince and he represents, like you said, big part of the demographics. But the reforms or the PR campaign attached to it, as Ali says, shouldn't overshadow where the starting point before the reform is and how fast has this pace been. Saudi Arabia is still considered the status of women. We talk about the whole idea of guardianship. It's not just driving. It's not just going to the movies. It's opening a bank account, having basically control over your life as a woman independently. All of these, even within the region, other countries, not just Iran, you look at Turkey, you look at Iraq, you look at all these other major countries, it's a very, very different starting point for Saudi Arabia. It's good news that these reforms reforms are happening, but I think they're long overdue. They're still very slow, and they're tainted by all kinds of controversy. You see women having the ban on driving is lifted, but then at the same time, women rights activists are arrested. There's talks of execution charges for one of the activists, or MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, also cracking down on other activists and critics within the clerical community, and basically not wanting anyone to even get credit within the country for these kind of reforms. So this type of top-down reform might not be bad news, but it's not the kind of excitement that is generated for it, I think, in the West. Most of that, I agree with Ali, that is inflated by PR.
Faisal, a lot to respond to there. Allegations that despite the reform-minded MBS, that there's crackdowns on corruption, that their women's rights aren't being fully recognized, and that a lot of these reforms may be window dressing, and there may be something also in MBS's personality that may be slightly problematic.
You know, with all honesty, you know, I believe that the kingdom is going through the right path. These reforms are very important in a crucial time in the region. As you stated, that 70% of the Saudi population is younger than 35. I'm here on the ground in the kingdom, and I could see the impact of these reforms. I could see females going to work every single day, driving themselves. In regard of the guardianship, we have to take it one step at a time. We have a generational gap in the kingdom. We have the older generation do not approve of all these reforms, and I think these fully female empowerment in the kingdom is coming. It's a matter of time. And in regard of Mr. Ali Al-Ahmed, he stated that this is cosmetics and PR show. As Ali Al-Ahmed always championed himself as a champion of human rights, I never once seen Ali Al-Ahmed speak about the atrocity Iran's doing in Syria.
Well, I'm not Iranian.
Yemen.
Maybe you are Iranian.
Okay.
I'm not Iranian. You are Iranian, I guess.
Okay. Can we just keep it civil until I ask the questions, because I want to get on to Iran in a minute.
We should take these steps in the right directions and work with the Saudi government to expand them. What I'm seeing here on the ground, it's a beautiful thing, honestly.
Okay, I want to talk to you regionally, because as MBS has become Crown Prince, of course, he has in many ways led the war against Yemen. We've seen the human toll there. Not so recently, just recently, also civilians killed. The U.S. Congress even talking about stopping supplying weapons for the war. We've seen a stiffening of attitudes towards Iran, the isolation of the Qataris. What's going on here?
Look, Saudi Arabia is in a region that is a very difficult region. You have proxy wars led by Iran all over the region. Saudi Arabia got involved in Yemen based on the request of the legitimate government of Yemen, which requested that Saudi Arabia help them when the Houthi rebels marched on Sana'a with the help of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Today, where is Abdullah Saleh? He's dead. The Houthis using child soldiers and making the situation, they don't want to sit down and have a political solution to the matter. So Saudi Arabia was pushed to be involved in this war in Yemen because we cannot have Iranian-backed militia, controlling Yemen, controlling the oil, sea lines. It's a very difficult situation.